What's up folks, Crush SG here, back with another quick tips video. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be all that quick, so perhaps just a regular tips video. Today we're going to talk about crit stats and how you should approach them. So there are two crit stats in the game, crit rate and crit damage. Crit rate increases the chance of landing a critical hit, and crit damage increases the amount of damage you deal when you land a critical hit. Now the reason why crit stats are significant is because they are in their own multiplicative category within the damage calculation formula. For those who want a more detailed breakdown on the damage calculation itself, I have a video for that, card in the top, link in the description. Anyway, having their own category means crit stats don't share an additive pool with any other stats. So what you see on the attribute screen is literally what you get. My 137 crit damage means whenever I score a critical hit, I deal 137% more damage with that hit. No fuss, no muss. For those who are still unclear on my point, it's easier to use a counter example to explain this. Let's look at elemental damage. As you can see on the attribute screen, I have 30% physical damage. The problem with elemental damage is what you see here is very often not actually what you get in terms of final damage output. And this is because elemental damage, which is what physical damage is considered, belongs to the bonus damage category, and it shares this category additively with almost every other bonus damage stat in the game. If I had my rank 2 Serpent Spine on my Razor with 4-piece gladiators, this is how the calculation actually looks like. With no fizz damage and 2000 sheet attack, we have 2000 sheet attack times 1 plus 35% from the Serpent Spine, plus 35% from Gladiators, plus 10% from Razor C1. And we have 3600. Now with 30% fizz damage, we have 2000 sheet attack times 1 plus 35% from the Serpent Spine, plus 35% from Gladiators, plus 10% from the C1, and plus 30% physical damage for a total of 4200. As you can see, this gives us only 16.7% more damage. Yeah, it's misleading, I know. It says 30% here, but it doesn't always give you 30%. Well, now you know why, and that's the significance of crit stats having their own multiplicative category. And with that out of the way, let's discuss how you should approach crit stats. Okay, so by now, I'm sure many of you have heard of a 1:2 ratio being recommended for crit rate and crit damage. Many recommend it, and many adhere to it, but not everyone knows why that's the sweet spot. Just that it seems to be what everyone else says. Here's how I would explain it. The stat weight of crit rate and crit damage in Genshin Impact is 1:2. This means on any given item or attribute slot, for any amount of crit that you can get, that same item or same stat slot can accommodate twice the amount of crit damage. As you can see, a plus 25-star headpiece gives 31.1% crit or 62.2% crit damage. 1:2. Now with this stat weight in mind, maintaining the same 1:2 ratio for crit stats simply gives you the most value out of your existing stat pools. The further you stray away from this ratio, the more of a given stat you need to achieve the same DPS output. Using 50% crit rate and 100% crit damage as an example, this is a 1:2 ratio. We see a relative DPS value of 3000. If we traded 25% crit for crit damage, based on the stat weight, we would gain 50% crit damage from the same gear. This gives us 25% crit rate and 150% crit damage. But as you can see, we actually lose 8.3% relative average DPS. In order to achieve DPS parity at 25% crit, we'd actually need 200% crit damage. That's 100% crit damage to make up for the 25% crit rate loss in order to achieve the same DPS output, a 1:4 ratio, and now the DPS value of crit damage is effectively halved. Now the same applies if we went the other way too. If we traded 50% crit damage, we'd gain 25% crit rate from the same gear and also lose 8.3% damage. In order to achieve DPS parity, we need to gain 50% crit rate to make up for the 50% crit damage loss, halving the DPS value of crit rate. Now you can do this for any value of crit and crit damage, and you will always find that you get the most value sticking as close to the 1:2 ratio as possible. And this is why the ratio is recommended as a sweet spot. Now that being said, there are both upper and lower limits to this ratio. The upper limit is of course 100% crit rate, at which point crit damage is the only way to go because crit rate no longer provides any damage value. The lower limit, on the other hand, is dictated by the game's base crit stats. All characters start with 5% crit rate and 50% crit damage. This is the reason why one of the more popular spreadsheets floating around in the community has 25% crit rate as the recommended minimum value before you can consider crit damage. Getting your crit rate to 25% before doing anything else brings the ratio to 1:2. 25% crit rate, 50% crit damage. Now this does not mean that all you need is 25% crit rate and you can just throw everything else into crit damage. I know there are a couple of videos out there making this claim and referencing that same spreadsheet. From a mathematical perspective, those claims are misrepresenting what the spreadsheet is actually trying to tell us. If you look at the spreadsheet and pick any of the sweet spot values, you'll see that the corresponding crit rate and crit damage values are always a 1:2 ratio, and this is the real message behind the spreadsheet. So to wrap things up, get your crit rate to 25% first, then work to maintain a 1:2 ratio from that point on. But of course, ultimately RNG is what it is. You may find yourself outside of this ratio, and that's perfectly fine. I myself am outside of this ratio when it comes to my razor. You gotta use what you get. This is just a general guideline to follow to optimizing your damage output. Alright, that's it for today, folks. Maybe you knew this already, maybe you didn't, but I hope this cleared some things up about crit stats. As always, thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't, share my videos with your friends, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later.